It began with a printer that wouldn't print. Not a power outage, not a missing cable, just silence. Inside the towering walls of the Central Bank of Bangladesh, the air on that quiet Friday morning was still, too still. A lone employee checked the machine meant to log every digital transfer, expecting the usual stack of paperwork, but there was nothing, just a blinking light. No sound, no receipts, no warnings, and no one, absolutely no one, had any idea that the largest digital heist in human history was already underway. You see, while most of the world slept, a shadowy group of hackers was stealing nearly $1 billion. Not from a crypto exchange, not from a tech startup, from a government's central bank, real money, disappearing into the ether. But here's the part that still baffles investigators to this day. The attack didn't involve brute force. It wasn't about breaking firewalls or cracking passwords in some Hollywood-style blitz. No, it was quieter, slower, smarter, like a ghost crawling through wires, waiting patiently for its moment to strike. And it struck when no one was watching. Friday and Saturday are weekends in Bangladesh. Banks are closed. Only skeleton staff are left behind, just a few employees to manage essential systems like SWIFT, the international banking network used to transfer billions in seconds. The system is supposed to be airtight, encrypted, and guarded by some of the strongest cybersecurity known to man. But what the world would soon discover is that it wasn't the SWIFT network that was vulnerable. It was the people using it. The employee who found the silent printer didn't panic. Not yet. He figured it was a glitch, a power issue maybe. He spent the entire day troubleshooting, but the printer remained dead. He went home thinking it would be fixed by Sunday when the technical team returned. But Saturday came, and the silence broke. After hours of more tinkering, the machine suddenly whirred to life. It began printing line after line after line. The stack grew, and then came the horror. Among the documents were 35 transfer confirmations totaling nearly $951 million, all sent out of the bank's account at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York to the Philippines. The transactions hadn't appeared in the digital logs. They didn't exist, at least not where they were supposed to. And yet, there they were, printed proof that the money had already started vanishing. In sheer panic, the staff dove into the system. They discovered that $81 million had already been processed and sent. The remaining $870 million? Still pending. The clock was ticking. They tried to call the Federal Reserve to stop the rest, but it was the weekend in the U.S. too. No one picked up. SWIFT advised shutting down the system immediately. But when they called the bank director for authorization, he dismissed their panic as an overreaction. Probably a clerical error, he said. That decision, those 5 casual words, may have cost them a fortune. By Sunday, the staff was back at work. They finally reached someone at SWIFT, but in America it was still the weekend. And in the Philippines, where the money had landed, a national holiday, the Chinese New Year, meant no one would be back at the receiving banks until Tuesday. Now, imagine being in that position. Watching your country's reserves, its lifeline, being siphoned away, and you can't get anyone on the phone. You're frozen, helpless. And the people who did this, they planned every second of it. The timing wasn't luck, it was orchestration. The hackers had designed the attack to land in a dead zone of communication, a perfect 4-day blackout across 3 countries. By the time the banks reopened, it would be too late. But how did they do it? How did they break through a system considered unbreakable? They didn't hack Swift. They hacked humans. It started a year earlier with emails, innocent-looking job applications sent to employees of the Bangladesh bank, just PDFs. Nothing strange until you opened them. Hidden inside was a virus, and once it was inside the bank's internal systems, it waited, watched, recorded. For months, the malware crawled through networks, gathering logins, learning the system, identifying the single computer that could send swift instructions to the Federal Reserve. It took nearly a year. And then, on the night of Thursday, February 4th, 2016, just after the bank closed, the ghosts moved in. They submitted 35 wire transfer requests, totaling nearly $1 billion from that one compromised machine. The Federal Reserve received them at 10:30 a.m. New York time. Everything looked normal. The requests were perfectly formatted, digitally signed. Why wouldn't they process them? 4 transfers went through. That's $81 million, gone in seconds. The remaining 31 were halted not by human intervention, but by pure, stupid, beautiful coincidence. You see, some of those transfers were directed to accounts at a bank branch located on a street called Jupiter in Manila. And Jupiter just happened to be the name of a company flagged for sanctions by U.S. authorities due to links with Iran. It wasn't the same company. It wasn't even in the same country. But the name triggered a red flag in the Federal Reserve System. That one glitch, the mix-up of a street name, saved $870 million. But the hackers didn't know that. They waited in the system for 7 hours, expecting the rest of the money to arrive. When nothing came, they assumed the working day in the U.S. had ended, and they logged out. They were off by just 1 hour. 1 hour later, a Federal Reserve official looked closer and realized the Jupiter flag was a mistake. He reached out through the SWIFT system to confirm the transfer with the Central Bank of Bangladesh. If the hackers had still been online, they could have replied, faked a confirmation, and the rest of the billion would have gone out. But they were gone, and that mistake saved a nation. The bank's staff was still in the dark until the printer came back to life. That was their first real clue that something was wrong. By then, the money had already started its journey into the underworld of unregulated finance. The $81 million had landed in the Philippines. The accounts were fake, opened months earlier with forged identities and kept dormant until now. The manager who approved them? A woman named Maya DeGito. She didn't just rubber stamp the paperwork. She coordinated everything. As soon as the funds hit, she had millions converted to cash and loaded into SUV. Box after box of Philippine pesos, over 1 million banknotes, were driven off into the night. The rest of the money still sitting in bank accounts would soon vanish as well. What happens next isn't just about laundering money through casinos. It's about a digital trail that led to one of the most dangerous cybercrime groups in the world, one backed not by greed but by a government. And the most chilling part? They're still out there. By the time the Central Bank of Bangladesh finally got someone on the phone in the Philippines, it was already too late. It was Tuesday 4 days after the heist had started. The holiday was over. Banks had reopened. Calls were going through. But the moment they reached a senior official at RCBC, the Rizal Commercial Banking Corporation, they were told something that made their blood run cold. All $81 million was gone. That's right. Every last cent vanished. But it hadn't just evaporated. The money had moved fast, in broad daylight, under the nose of regulators and security cameras. The thieves weren't hiding in the shadows anymore. They had planned for this exact moment, and every second of silence from the banks had been a gift. Let's rewind just a bit. On the Friday after the money landed, Maya DeGito, the RCBC branch manager who had approved the fake accounts, moved into action. She requested massive cash deliveries from nearby branches. She organized boxes, loaded millions of pesos into the trunk of a Lexus SUV, and watched as it drove off. $22 million liquefied into untraceable paper. Employees saw her doing it. They watched her coordinate everything, but no one asked questions. Not then. It was just another transaction in a country where questions get you in trouble. That left $59 million still sitting in the bank. The Bangladeshi officials assumed they had time, that by Tuesday morning they could freeze the accounts and maybe salvage the rest. They were wrong, because during the 5-hour window it took to reach someone with authority at RCBC, Maya struck again. She had already arranged for the rest of the money to be withdrawn. No hesitation, no delay. This time she didn't need to scramble. It was the beginning of the week, business hours. Everything moved faster. By the time the Central Bank of Bangladesh finally spoke to the right person, it was already gone. Now, $81 million doesn't just disappear. It needs to be cleaned, disguised, reborn. And that's where the second phase of the plan came in: money laundering, executed with surgical precision. Their tool of choice? Casinos. The Philippines is one of the few countries where casinos operate with virtually no financial oversight, no obligation to report suspicious transactions, no mandatory background checks on high rollers. To the outside world, money that enters a casino is just someone's gamble, and money that leaves is just someone's win. So the thieves brought in their soldiers. 10 to 15 individuals, all Chinese nationals, entered the Philippines and walked straight into high-end casinos. They weren't the ones who had executed the hack. These were the middlemen paid in silence, tasked with one job: clean the money. They walked in carrying bags of pesos, exchanged them for casino chips, and started playing. But here's the catch: they weren't playing to win or lose. They were just moving chips in circles, betting against each other, keeping the money in motion, but never truly risking it. The casino took its small cut 1 or 2%, and no one blinked. It was the perfect disguise. After a few hours of play, they cashed out. New bills, clean bills, bills that could no longer be tied to Bangladesh. And just like that, the money was gone. It was genius. Dirty, but genius. Meanwhile, back in Dhaka, the central bank was spiraling. Security footage revealed nothing. No intruders. No night shift saboteurs, just a janitor doing rounds. They checked system logs empty. The hackers had wiped everything. Even the printer had been sabotaged to delay discovery. It didn't feel like a hack. It felt like a haunting. But slowly, the pieces started coming together. International cybercrime experts were brought in. The FBI, Interpol, digital forensic specialists. And what they found changed everything. They isolated the malware used to infiltrate the bank's network. It was sophisticated, too sophisticated for freelance hackers. And then came the first break. The malware bore a digital fingerprint lines of code that matched a previous cyber attack, specifically the 2014 Sony Pictures hack. You might remember it. the massive breach where emails, unreleased movies, and internal files from Sony were leaked to the public. It was chaos. Executives were fired, celebrities were exposed, and the attack was traced back to a shadowy group known as Lazarus. Now here's the kicker. Lazarus wasn't just some rogue hacking collective. It was backed openly, brazenly by North Korea. And the Sony hack? That had been retaliation. Sony had released a comedy that mocked Kim Jong-un. North Korea warned them not to. Theaters were threatened. The film was pulled from cinemas. Then Lazarus struck, crippling Sony's operations and humiliating the company. Now the exact same malware, same code structure, same digital signature had just been used to steal $81 million from a national bank. That wasn't a coincidence. Lazarus had done it again. Why would North Korea steal from Bangladesh? Simple. Desperation. The country was and still is crippled by international sanctions. Its economy is isolated. Its people are starving. It needs foreign currency to survive, but it can't earn it legally. So it turns to its elite cyber warfare division hackers trained from childhood, working not from underground bunkers but government buildings. And it wasn't the last time they'd strike. In 2017, Lazarus launched a WannaCry ransomware attack, a global catastrophe that locked computers in over 150 countries. Hospitals, airports, banks, governments, all held hostage by a simple message on a red screen. Pay up or lose everything. It was chaos. Millions paid the ransom in Bitcoin. Billions were lost in productivity, repair, and recovery. And again, traces led back to Lazarus, back to North Korea. But let's return to the Bangladesh bank heist. In the aftermath, heads rolled. The bank's governor resigned. Directors stepped down. International headlines declared it the biggest digital theft in history. And yet, not a single hacker was caught. Not one. The only person arrested and convicted? Maya Degito, the bank manager in the Philippines who helped the thieves move the money. She was sentenced to 59 years in prison and fined $19 million. A punishment so severe, so symbolic, it felt more like scapegoating than justice. Was she paid? Coerced? Brainwashed? We may never know. But one thing's clear, she didn't act alone. She didn't orchestrate the hack. She was just a door the thieves walked through. A door that's now slammed shut forever. Meanwhile, the hackers, they vanished. The money? Scattered, laundered, irrecoverable. The Lazarus Group became a myth, a ghost in the machine. And while the world upgraded firewalls and tightened networks, one truth lingered in the shadows. If they could pull this off once, they could do it again. Bigger, faster, smarter. And they will, but the story doesn't end here. Because hidden within this digital labyrinth is one more twist. One last move that the world almost missed. A move that connected this billion-dollar theft to a rogue satellite, a forgotten Chinese businessman, and an encrypted briefcase that resurfaced halfway across the globe. We'll uncover all of that and more. Because sometimes the most dangerous threats don't come from bombs, armies, or guns. They come in silence, with no fingerprints, and no warning. Now the world had moved on. News outlets had milked the Bangladesh bank heist dry. Editorials were written, panels debated. Security firms cashed in with lessons learned. And while the headlines faded, behind closed doors, intelligence agencies were tearing their hair out. Something wasn't sitting right. $81 million didn't just vanish. Someone spent it. Someone moved it. And somewhere in that laundering process, amid the chips, the pesos, the smoke, and mirrors, someone left a trace. That trace came from an unexpected place. A power outage in Macau. It was barely a footnote in local news. A blackout that shut down a portion of a casino district for 23 minutes. Most dismissed it as a glitch in the grid. But one satellite monitoring electromagnetic activity in East Asia picked up something odd. A data burst. Not just any data. Encrypted code pulsing from a rooftop, bouncing off a commercial satellite, and aimed at a receiver deep in the mountains of North Korea. Someone had just transmitted 46 gigabytes of compressed, multi-layered data directly to a known Lazarus-controlled base. That alone would have raised eyebrows. But what really lit up alarms was this. Inside that data was the blueprint of a laundering operation. Names, codes, transaction hashes, casino logs, RCBC internal timestamps. Everything. Someone had documented the entire heist. And now they were sending it back home. Who would do that? Who would risk everything to send a full blueprint of a crime back to the architects? The answer? Someone who wanted leverage. A man named Zheng Wei. On paper, John was a nobody. A former casino consultant, born in southern China, fluent in Tagalog, with deep ties to underground gambling networks in Manila and Macau. He'd helped open and rig hundreds of casino floors. But what investigators didn't know until now was that June had been working with Lazarus all along. But he wasn't loyal. Jun had grown paranoid. He'd watched what happened to people who crossed Pyongyang. If North Korea suspected him of disloyalty or worse, theft, he'd be a ghost before sunrise. So he prepared insurance. He collected everything: emails, security footage, bank employee voice memos. He even recorded Maya DeGuido's conversations in her office, unbeknownst to her. And then he vanished. Interpol, alerted by the satellite incident, put out a quiet red notice, but John wasn't easy to find. Until one morning in early 2018, a cleaning crew in a rundown hotel in Kuala Lumpur discovered something strange in a closet. A metal briefcase. Locked, they handed it over to local police, who scanned it and discovered it wasn't dangerous, just filled with paper. Hundreds of documents, all labeled, all stamped. Each one a piece of the Bangladesh bank heist. When the contents reached intelligence agencies in the US, the Philippines, and Bangladesh, jaws dropped. Because the documents confirmed something that had only been suspected. The Lazarus Group hadn't just stolen the money. They were using it to build something. Inside the briefcase were invoices, fake company names, and purchase orders linked to the acquisition of specialized chipsets, thermal cooling systems, and Russian-designed encryption units. What were they building? A black site blockchain rig powered by hydroelectricity, buried deep inside North Korea's mountainous border near China. The goal wasn't to mine Bitcoin. It was to create their own cryptocurrency. Lazarus was done stealing money. They were now designing a currency immune to sanctions, untraceable by the global banking system and already being tested on dark net arms markets and spyware trade zones. And they had used Bangladesh's stolen millions to fund the prototype. This wasn't a heist. It was a proof of concept. But here's the twist that made even hardened cybersecurity analysts fall silent. The plan had worked before. The documents showed this wasn't Lazarus's first successful theft. The Bangladesh heist was their most visible, but not their first. They had siphoned smaller sums, $2 million here, $4 million there, from obscure African central banks, low-security crypto startups, and even an NGO payroll system in Eastern Europe. Each time, the funds were funneled through unregulated sectors: gold in Congo, rare earth metals in Manzia, even weapons sales in Yemen. The money was being used to fuel a silent war, one fought not with bullets, but with bandwidth. A war where governments couldn't retaliate without provoking nuclear escalation. A war North Korea was winning, and then came the final blow. The briefcase also contained a list, 10 names, all international bankers, each marked with a black star. 8 of those names were already dead. Plane crash, stroke, car accident, suicide. 2 of them were under 45. One of them had died in his sleep on a train, with no signs of trauma. All were connected to cyber fraud investigations. The message was clear. Lazarus wasn't just a hacking group. It was a black ops financial weapon wielded by a government with no accountability, no boundaries, and nothing to lose. And the scariest part, they weren't done. A final note, handwritten in Korean, was found taped to the underside of the briefcase lid. It translated to, "This was a rehearsal. The show begins soon." The Bangladesh heist wasn't the climax. It was the opening act. And the next one? It's already in motion. Somewhere as you read this, a seemingly harmless email sits unopened in the inbox of a bank employee. It contains a PDF, a resume, a greeting from an old classmate, maybe even a LinkedIn link. And one click, that's all it takes for history to repeat itself, because the ghosts in the network don't knock anymore. They're already inside.